my name is Joy Montgomery, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about the issue of overpopulation for my final project. To get started, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background and kind of define for you what exactly is overpopulation and how does a environment or system become overpopulated. The textbook defines overpopulation as not a matter of simply the number of people on Earth. Rather, it depends on the relationship between the number of people and the availability of resources. So let's break this down. The problem of overpopulation is two-sided. On the one hand, you have a finite system of Earth, and over time you add more and more people to it. Now, eventually the planet will become quote-unquote overpopulated due to the fact that you literally cannot fit another person on Earth. But this isn't what the textbook is talking about. It's also talking about the resources and the availability of them. So, what does this mean? The availability of resources is talking about things like enough food for everybody to eat, enough water for everybody to drink, and enough space for everybody to live comfortably. Today, we hear overpopulation come up here and there, but not very often. Before, it wasn't even being mentioned, but today it seems much more drastic. Why is this? Well, to answer this, we refer to the geographer's principle of the natural increase rate, or NIR, which compares the population in billions to the year. As you can see, we had the first major jump or increase in the population around the 1950s. This was due to the end of World War II. Because the entire world pretty much stopped fighting and stopped killing and started thriving, then you have more and more people automatically being added to the globe. But during the 1950s, a widespread of knowledge at this time, such as books like The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich, a Stanford professor, illustrated a more gloom picture of what the future might look like due to overpopulation. In his book, Ehrlich paints a picture of the existing population in the 1950s not being fed adequately and growing too rapidly and at an unreasonable rate to expect significant improvements in order to produce enough food to feed everyone. He also argued that in the growing population, it placed an escalating strain on all aspects of the natural world. During this time, people were scared by these facts, thinking that we were overbreeding and overpopulating the Earth. Although Ehrlich's predictions over the severity of population growth and food scarcity may have been a little off, he was right about our new industrial ways and the harm that they would cause, especially as we have come into the 21st century. Now, as we look back at our natural increase rate chart, we can see that there is also another drastic increase in the population leading up to the 21st century. During this time, there were major improvements made to medicine and technology that made this possible. Two common examples of these improvements are vaccinations to ward off many previously common deadly diseases and the coming of the drilling industry that has formed around our need for fossil fuels. With the spread of knowledge, medicine has not only become better able to save people from dying, like infants, but also has helped increase the number of years that people can live healthy lives. Technology, on the other hand, has not only helped to better improve how we can find and use natural resources that we have, but also helped spread this wealth of knowledge about how to better improve our planet and ward off overpopulation. To show you an example of the NIR chart over time, I used Japan's populations at two different points in times, comparing the age and the percent of the population. It is a wonderful example of how after the 1950s there was an increase in the number of people being born or a higher birth rate at this time, which explains the first increase that we saw in the NRI chart. As we look at the second chart, which is the percent of the population in the 2000s as we're approaching the 21st century, you can see that the average age of the population, or where there is the biggest bulge, moves from under 20 in the first chart to over 50 in the second chart. This is a wonderful illustration of how the life expectancy rate went up. This also shows how it's not that we started multiplying like rabbits, but that we stopped dropping like flies. So now that we know where the issues of overpopulation have originated from and a little bit more about it, I want to talk about what has been done to prevent the problem so far. One way that there has been attempts in controlling population is through family planning programs, or in other words, trying to control the number of people in a family. Because if you add 2 kids minus every 2 adults that die, then you end up with no population growth. China's government, seeing a rapid growth, adopted the one-child policy in the 1980s. This promoted families to only have 1 kid, giving them incentives like better housing or longer maternity leaves. They also help families to control this by providing free contraceptive measures to prevent more children than desired. Although the promotion of this policy has started to dwindle, promotion posters like the one here can still be seen throughout China. India, which was the first country to try to enact population control measures, has put in place a few different policies over time. The first, in 1952, birth control devices were given out or subsidized by the government. Still seeing an increase in the overall population size, the government in 1972 legalized abortions and also began to take on a more hands-on role. The establishment of sterilization camps began to appear in 1971. These controversial camps would perform surgical sterilizations on people in exchange for about the rate of 1 month's pay at the time. Because these programs were so controversial, they were soon shut down due to public fear that they might soon be forced to participate. After shutting down these camps, the Indian government moved towards the process of educating rather than birth control in order to attempt to control or slow population growth. Radio and televised programs were broadcasted nationally to help distribute the knowledge. Local health centers also began to better educate people on the problem of overpopulation and contraceptions. Although these programs were much better morally, they had little success due to the fact that few people have access to media and healthcare in India. How big is the problem of overpopulation today? To see how big of a problem the growing population is today, we first need to look at how many people there are on Earth today. As you can see from the cartograph, the countries with the largest populations are China and India. But what you don't see is the other side of the problem, the consumption of resources. The United States is by far the biggest consumer of the world's natural resources. Using the natural resource of water as an example, we can see from the bar graph that the United States is at the top, and when you add in Canada, North America by far becomes the biggest consumer of water per capita compared to the rest of the world. Now that we have seen one of the ways that U.S. outranks other nations in consumptions, I would like to discuss how we are the leading cause of overconsuming resources, therefore paving the way to overpopulation. The one word I would like to focus on is overconsumption. Being that overpopulation is a concern of too many people and a concern of resources, overconsumption should be one of our main concerns. The U.S. has a supersize me appetite for these resources. The U.S. doesn't just take the lead in the amount of water that we use per capita, but also the amount of meat that we eat per person. Not to mention, we are the leading usage per person in fossil fuels. Even though we are less than 5% of the population, we take up 25% of the coal, 26% of the oil, and 27% of the natural gas from the world supply. With such a small population, it is clear to see our overconsumption as we take away a quarter of the world's fossil fuel resources. How are we using all this fuel, you may be asking? One great example is with our cars. Everywhere you go in the world, people have cars. Some places they are more common than others, but you can't find a country without one. Cars are heavy polluters and contribute to CO2 emissions and harming our environment. Back in 2003, even over 10 years ago, the U.S. had more privately owned cars than we did driver's license. This still holds true today. Supersizing houses also took up a lot of resources, and despite there being fewer people per household on average, new houses in the US were 38% bigger in 2002 than in 1975. This supersize me attitude of America has caused us to not only take multiples, but also way too much of what we need, and therefore taking it away from the rest of the population. To show the effect of what overconsumption does, I wanted to look at the example of CO2 emissions, or carbon dioxide emissions. They are a measure of not only the impact that we have on the environment, but also a surrogate for the consumption of fossil fuels. Today, the richest 7% of the people pollute 50% of the carbon dioxide emissions, while the poorest 50% only pollute 7% of the emissions. So now that we have discussed a little on what overpopulation is and what has been done about it in the past, I wanted to talk to you about what our population might look like in the future. First, to give you a better idea of what our population might look like, I found a video by Hans Rosling that illustrates a graph over time comparing population, income, and lifespan. Although income may not translate precisely into an increase in resource use and pollution, the correlation between the two has shown to be very strong. As you watch the video, pay attention not only to the direction the bubbles are moving, but how big the bubbles are as well. For each bubble represents a different country, and each country represents a different continent.
And yet, despite the enormous disparities today, we have seen 200 years of remarkable progress. That huge historical gap between the West and the rest is now closing. We have become an entirely new converging world. And I see a clear trend into the future. With aid, trade, green technology and peace, it's fully possible that everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
As we all make the move slowly towards this healthy, wealthy corner, I want you to keep in mind that it is not how many people in the world that will make us overpopulated. It's the amount of resources that you use up. Thank you.